Okay, I'm a little more in Maine at this point. And I wanted to talk about particularly the Varsa with you. It was a magnificent historical event, and Vajradakini was the key organization, the lead organization for the curriculum and running the Varsa. So if you can imagine, first of all, what is the Varsa? Fully ordained monks and nuns have required monthly, bi-monthly, and annual ceremonies. And in order to conduct those ceremonies, there have to be 4 fully ordained monks or 4 fully ordained nuns. And the ceremonies are the sojang, the varsa, and the paravana. The varsa is either 3 months or a half varsa, which we did 6 weeks. And at the time of the Buddha, it was when the Sangha came together and practiced together and when the Buddha gave teachings. And so the Buddha conducted over 25 Varsas in Shravasti, India. So all of the foundational Buddhism, all of the, not all of the sutras, but most of the sutras were taught in Shravasti. And they were taught to a Sangha of both monks and nuns. Historically, the nuns seem to be erased from the picture. But I have talked to Bhikkhu Bodhi about translation. And when he was translating the sutras into English, he would start with the Buddha was teaching the Sangha, and he used the word bhikshu, but at the time he was translating, that was meant to be monks and nuns. As the translation then continued, it was interpreted as just monks. So by bringing nuns to Shravasti, after all of these 2,000 years, we were reclaiming the presence of nuns and teaching the ceremonies to the Himalayan nuns who have not practiced them as a women's Sangha. So before this period, the nuns would ask a monk to come over from the monastery and conduct the small part that novice nuns need. And they were never really given the information about full participation in the Sangha and the responsibilities, requirements, and let's say full participant information that comes with full ordination. So this Varsa on many, many levels was historic, and on many levels was presenting to the International Women's Sangha what full participation looks like. We are still working on full ordination for all of the Himalayan Sangha, but as some of you are aware, a year ago, there was a ordination of about 100 nuns in Bhutan. And most of those nuns came to this Varsa, which means they were taught how to conduct the Varsa ceremonies. And they demonstrated to their other Himalayan sisters what it was like for people who looked like them to be conducting the ceremonies they were participating in. So that was historic in nature. This was the first Varsa for those newly ordained nuns, and it was in Shravasti, which is this most important sacred site for Buddhism. So in terms of the responsibility that Vajradakini held, we can think about it as a cart with two wheels. One wheel was holiness at the center of the wheel and spokes going out to who's going to pay for it, who's going to cover the food, the cost of using the buildings, the cost of electricity. It could not have happened if he had not built the temple for the ceremonies in Shravasti. So that was his side of the responsibility. Our side was, you don't just sit there. Varsa is the time when the Sangha comes together to meditate together and to learn together, and particularly in many Sanghas to learn a deeper understanding of the meaning of holding the fully ordained vows, the 358 vows. Why? Why are they important? What are we learning from them? So with both of those wheels in place, Vajradakini was the center or the hub of the other wheel. And we were communicating with who were the qualified teachers, who is an abbess that has the status to be the presiding abbess, what will be taught, how it will be taught, and then the day-to-day running of the program, in the same way, let's say the dean would oversee a college operations. And, to really think karmically of how did it come together that we could find a presiding abbess who had the level of training and the level of overall experience to be totally qualified to hold any aspect of the rituals, the level of teaching, the retreats. So Venerable Gogwang, who was our presiding abbess, had been a nun for 60 years, had been an administrator of male and female monks for 15 years, and had done 6 years of silent retreat. So it's not as though, there are more than a handful of nuns internationally who have her level of qualifications. And we can see in this how fragile the fully ordained women's community is, because over and over, nuns have had to come together and raise the education level and raise the capacity of nuns to pass it to future generations. Without, the level of experience that Venerable Gogwang and a handful of nuns in Taiwan reached in my generation, we couldn't pass it to the next generation. But what we did is we passed a lot of this experience to the next generation. And so Venerable Gogwang and the participation of Dharma Drum was key, but also Venerable Thupten Chodron and the participation of Shravasti Abbey, because each monastery practices the rituals differently. And Venerable Thupten Chodron's monastery had translated all of the rituals into English and were practicing in English, but using Chinese music. So we found English-speaking nuns who were qualified to work with the Chinese nuns who were qualified, who then could present internationally this very rare program. So, and this is even a simple explanation of how difficult it was to fit the legal, let's say, aspects of the Varsa together. So I want to open up with pictures now. Let me see if I can, I apologize. I had it set up and then shifted a little. So anyway, planning. There were years of planning to get the to get it even moved from a potential to a reality. Venerable Guangang was actually, she would joke about it, the third abbess who then was ready to take the full responsibility. I practiced this, but I didn't practice it with Zoom. All right, I'll just share the screen again and do it one slide at a time. Okay, so here you can see the extraordinary temple that Holiness built. It really was exquisitely beautiful. And we moved from planning into reality and spent a year maybe doing just outreach to nuns and thinking about if we are having different nationalities, how do we have to prepare? So one way is, you can see the prayer book. We needed 4 different prayer books. The prayer books were in English, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Tibetan. And we had a wonderful translator, Venerable Kuntruk Wanchuk, who took the novice part of the major ceremonies and translated that into Tibetan. So all of the novice Himalayan nuns had instructions in their own language, and the other prayer books were published in English. But just thinking of Kenmo Trinley's help and different Sangha around the world to get everything into the different languages that we needed. We had, okay, here's the curriculum planning. So this is day by day of the Varsa. The pink is monastic ceremonies. The yellow is monastic curriculum. The blue is retreat, and the green is rest days. So we had this incredible plan to set in motion. And then you can see, this is actually the last week, the difference between the plan and then putting it into action was on the ground juggling, is all I can say. Magnificent on the ground juggling. So all of that planning, and then here we were in India and people started to arrive. So we had 53 from Bhutan, half of whom were fully ordained. 30 from Ladakh and Nepal, half of whom were fully ordained. 30 from Vietnam, probably 3/4 were fully ordained, and fully ordained from several different Western countries. And we can say we had 53 from Bhutan, but they came from 9 different nunneries. Vietnam, 6 different nunneries. So all of these people were arriving within a 3-day period in the extreme heat, and they didn't know each other. So we had not only we had a translator for Bhutan, but there had to be at least 6 different dialects. We had a translator for Tibetan, but in Tibetan there's Ladakhi and Tibetan and dialects or accents within that. So it was this wild coming together, and as people arrived, there are legal Vinaya rules that fully ordained and novices can't be in the same room together. So then we had to use all the rooms, but move people around so that people were in living quarters relative to ordination. So our on-the-ground team came from Samtenling, and that was the really wonderful Acharya Kunsang, and 3 volunteer nuns with her, Konchog Lamo, Lamo Chodron, and Achi. And those nuns worked in many, many capacities. Then there was the issue of food. Taiwanese and Vietnamese diet and Western diet is totally different than Himalayan diet. And Holiness, in his, just incredible kindness, instructed that we had a set of cooks that could run 2 kitchens, one with the Himalayan diet and one with the Vietnamese, Taiwanese diet. And Venerable Sun was the leader in the kitchen for that. So, all right, first you have to have people in their rooms, then you have to feed the people. But then everyone had to learn, I believe we had to learn 5 rituals that had to be learned and performed relative to the full moon. So the nuns from Shravasti Abbey put together like a puzzle, how to introduce the ritual, what it was and what its purpose was, how to rehearse the ritual, and how to perform it as we learned the next ritual, step by step by step, performing all of these 5 rituals in English with Chinese music. I cannot tell you how generous everyone was, not to say we can't do this, this is too much. All of this was accomplished within the first week. So here is Venerable Guoguang in her formal robes, and the nuns sitting. So everyone took in tremendous amounts of information in those first few days that week. And it was beautiful. And fortunately, in the mornings, we had the morning service designed, as I showed you in the prayer book, with prayers that everybody was familiar with in their own languages. And when we did evaluations as to, what was the most, your favorite part of the Varsa, for 60% was that morning service. So on the one hand, we had everybody learning new information. On the other hand, we had these extraordinary early morning services with the most beautiful music. And probably the music was particularly beautiful because the 30 nuns from the Durg Amitabha, Ladakh and Nepal, had an amazing chant master, and they have a self-sufficient monastery in which they have music designed for women's voices in multiple harmonies. So it wasn't the low male Tibetan chanting, it was this beautiful, beautiful chanting. And the Chinese music was beautiful. And it was a lot to learn. So here is, in the center is Venerable Chuni, who was our chant mistress, and ritual expert in terms of how to do it. And then to her right, Venerable Damcho, who was the second Vinaya teacher. Venerable Guoguang and Venerable Damcho were the Vinaya teachers, but she also was the ritual expert for carrying out the rituals. And because these were monastic rituals for bhikshunis, we had nun translators. So this is the, on the far right, the Bhutanese nun who translated, and on the far left, the Vietnamese nun translator. So it was really not appropriate for the two monks who were the most expert translators to translate for any of the monastic ceremonies for the bhikshunis. But the nuns just stepped up, let's say. So let's say this was full on every day, starting with the early morning ritual, then the morning class, learning a ritual, then by afternoon or the next morning carrying out the ritual. Intense, let's just say. And it culminated, right, intense and in heat. Here I am almost having heat stroke, literally. I don't know how to describe to you the heat. But then it culminated with walking to Shravasti, to the archaeological site, a procession with Venerable Gogwang leading general prayers, but actually then we did the Heart Sutra in each language. So sitting and meditating on the very seat where the Buddha taught, and coming together with the Heart Sutra. So this photo was taken at the conclusion of all of those monastic rituals that had to be carried out in order to start the Varsa. So you see the 131, I believe, was the total number from all over the world. So with that completed, then we had to form a functioning community, and a community of sisters in the Dharma. And I think in many ways, that's what we all took from this, because even though we're all nuns, it's not as though we know a lot about how Vietnamese nuns practice, or how what the lives are like in Bhutan and Nepal and Ladakh, or Taiwan. So there were many ways that we formed community. Here is a picture of Venerable Gogwang, and I can't tell you what an honor it was to work with her. So we had levels of coming together. Venerable Gogwang fulfilled a ritual role, taught the Vinaya, and taught a retreat from the Taiwanese Chan tradition. But on the ground, we had me and Acharya Kunsang. So Acharya Kunsang would see where are the difficulties and confusion arising in the community. She would inform me. I would talk to first the teaching team, and then we would bring in leaders from each of the different groups to see if we could solve the problem. And if we couldn't solve the problem together, then we would bring it to Venerable Gogwang. But that initiated sort of a communication system that we used throughout that really was pretty wonderful. And I loved working with the different international groups, all who came with different cultures. So once the significant rituals were over, we could start to understand that in many cultures, The noon meal is the only meal, certainly the main meal, for fully ordained. So there are long rituals surrounding that meal, maybe 20 minutes of recitation to 30 minutes to longer recitations. And the Himalayan nuns customarily ate in the temple. So they said, I know you have different dining rooms, but we prefer to eat in the temple. And the Western dining room, or it wasn't Western, let's say the Asian dining room where the Western nuns ate, the Vietnamese then formed their section of the dining room, and we, Taiwanese and Western, participated in the Vietnamese leading the meal chanting in that dining room. So if we have the room set up, proper diet, and then at least some of the rituals done in the way people were accustomed to, then people relaxed. So once that was set, I have to show you. This is Kanchog Lamo, who I miss so much, Acharya Kunsang. So in the background, throughout all of this, they were getting done whatever needed to get done, where the gaps were, who needed what. They were just the most selfless, wonderful nuns. Tremendous. So then the curriculum began of a very steady schedule. The early morning ritual, the morning classes, which were an hour and a half, the lunch, and then a break in the heat, starting again at 2:30 with the afternoon class, a break, then walking meditation with a sitting practice done in the different traditions. People separated into their different traditions. So then we could function on a day-to-day level and start giving information. The nuns who were ordained in Bhutan had such a mix of and this was the largest group, 53. Some had, let's say, full high school education, if not a year or two of college education. Some had no education whatsoever, and as far as we could tell, they had almost no Buddhist philosophical education. So they were all fairly new in terms of the Dharma, and none of them had meditation. The Vietnamese nuns had a lot of philosophical education. They had a lot of Dharma education, but the way the Dharma is practiced as Mahayana nuns in Vietnam is mainly ritual and service and almost no meditation. The Ladakhi nuns and Nepal nuns had, some had completed 3-year retreat. They had extraordinary ritual education. They had no Vinaya education. Even the fully ordained nuns, they had the ordination ceremony for the Bhutanese and half of the Ladakhi and Nepalese nuns. And after the ordination, they gave 3 days of Vinaya education, but then that was it. They went back to their monasteries. So every single vow has levels of understanding in terms of the vow itself. And then all of the vows are meant to address how we work with our minds, particularly how one overcomes attachment at the most subtle level. So that was probably new for almost everyone, to have that level of Vinaya training and to start to feel secure. How do I know when I break my vows? I have the vows, I got the vows, I went home. I can't tell you how important it is to have experienced nuns teaching the Vinaya to new nuns. So what we accomplished was just they were hungry for knowledge, particularly the Amitabha nuns, absolutely as though they were starved for the information we were giving. And we interspersed the lectures from Venerable Gogwang and Venerable Damcho with presentations from the different countries about what life was like in that country. So here is one of the nuns from the Bhutanese Nuns Association. And they do a lot of service and a lot of organizing of nuns. But again, they didn't have philosophical training and they didn't have monastic training. But they could talk about raising the status of the nuns in Bhutan. And when I say raising the status, one of the nuns who came from Bhutan was talking about her life, and her life before full ordination was they were building a temple carrying the building materials on their back. And they were supposed to sand the cement floors, but there were no sanding machines. So they were sanding it with their hands, which became raw with, in nighttime, they would pick out the granules of dirt, and the level of food they received was really poor. And they may or may not have a qualified teacher there who would give them Dharma education. So we could see the differences. And let's say in the Himalayas, we had two of the geshes from Domaling. They built their own temple carrying the materials on their back. And yes, they have received the full philosophical training, but not the monastic training and not the welcome as fully ordained nuns into adult participation in the ordained Sangha. So to be present as we did the first sojong, which is the bi-monthly ceremony, and see what it was like for our Himalayan sisters to be in ceremonies that were run by fully ordained nuns, and realize, they're not dependent on the monks for these ceremonies. They're dependent on ordination level for these ceremonies. So I think many of the nuns had a new understanding of why full ordination is important, why it's important for them. And a sense of, let's say, spiritual agency, spiritual authority. Just watching Venerable Gogwang function as the, in the role that they would only have seen high Rinpoches function before, high male Rinpoches, let's say. So it was just phenomenal, and a joy and a pleasure. And another time I'll talk about some of the stories from other nuns' lives who endured incredible hardship. And counterpoint with seeing the Druk Amitabha nuns who have the full support who have spiritual authority, spiritual agency. And the power of those nuns, and the power in the sense of the joy of self-confidence, the joy of confidence in all aspects of being a nun, particularly once they had the missing piece of some of the Vinaya aspects. So let's see if I'll go back to our wonderful schedule. So we had, let's say, 2 weeks of straight education, and then we moved into 2 weeks of retreat. And I taught the Shravasti curriculum that some of you are familiar with, and then Venerable Gogwang taught silent illumination, and really understanding that most of the nuns certainly do ceremonies, certainly do Vajrayana rituals, but hadn't been introduced to then what is like shamatha meditation, where you look at how your mind functions and how you sit in a way that leads to understanding nature of mind. So it was wonderful to really actually experience how close the silent illumination method is, particularly to the new instructions from His Holiness on the Shravasti curriculum in terms of levels of subtlety. So then, impermanence, things came to an end. His Holiness arrived for the last 2 days, the concluding ceremonies. The Varsa for Bhikshunis functions in reliance. So it's not, the monks and nuns are never meant to be totally separate. They function separately, but the opening and the concluding ceremonies had one small ceremony where the nuns went to the monks as their Dharma brothers, saying, we were glad you were there if we needed your support. And do you have any guidance that you saw from the outside, essentially? And then the conclusion was at the archaeological site again, and here is Holiness with myself and Venerable Gogwang under the Bodhi tree. There's a Bodhi tree planted there from the original Bodhi tree. And here we are sitting again in the seat where Buddha sat. There's one small section that's like a 6-foot diameter circle. That was where the Buddha sat. So there was this wonderful ceremony. And here is part of the team. So Venerable Gogwang with Venerable Chang Sai and Venerable Chang Hua, who were her attendants and translators, Acharya Kunsang, who was the on-the-ground pulse of the community, our Vietnamese translator, and here's Ani Sang, who was the head of the kitchen. And then I want to conclude with this mandala offering, because I want you to know how involved you were as Vajradakini Sangha. So Holiness sponsored the travel for the major teachers, and we hired Tiffany, who was tracking all kinds of information in terms of, who needed scholarships. And she was tracking people's travel. How do we get all these people who don't speak English through Delhi and over to Shravasti? How do we work with a travel agent to arrange all the busing and hotels? And we as a board decided, and with different donors, that we would sponsor as an offering my travel. We sponsored a group of Vietnamese nuns who needed financial help. Holiness sponsored other groups of nuns and hired a bus from Bhutan. So there were, the major financial reality was on his side, but also we sponsored, all the meals had a price. We sponsored a day and a half of meals at the Varsa. We sponsored a mandala offering for Holiness in gratitude for this activity, but also all of his different activities. So all of the donations that you make to Vajra Dakini also flowed into financial participation, and Tiffany's salary was covered by Vajra Dakini, and she was working night and day by July. And so all of this participation as sponsors means you receive exactly the same blessings and merit as all the nuns who were there. So by making it possible, it's indistinguishable in terms of the spiritual resonance. In the same way that Holiness built the temple, you sponsored all of my work and all of Tiffany's work. And so, we really see, how many different kinds of people coming together internationally it took to make this extraordinary historic event happen. And then, when I look into the future and see, oh my goodness, the Bhutanese nuns now, the Bhutanese, Nepalese, and Ladakhi nuns now have the ordination. In 12 years, they'll be able, 10 or 12, I'd have to read again exactly. They'll be able to offer the ordination. So it won't be dependent on the Tibetan Sangha anymore in terms of approval. If people choose to take the ordination from the Bhutanese Sangha. So that was just the first 2 months. Then once Holiness was there, he just gave extraordinary teachings from the Vajrayana. All of our nuns left other than a small group. The Vajrayana teachings happened to the Kenmos, Khenpos, and up to Rinpoche's, and then the Shravasti teaching. So then half of that group left, more people came in, and we had the Shravasti teachings. So this is just a start. I want to make, and it's just the photographs I had. I don't know if I can organize all of the different photos of the experiences that were just so incredible, but I can tell you that the people were sobbing as they left. The Vietnamese were sobbing. Venerable Gogwang was teary. I don't know if I told you last week that, we walked, I didn't walk. Most of the nuns walked over to Shravasti. It was probably a half-hour walk for the final ceremony. But then they stayed there singing, and then they walked back. And somehow in the last day or two, the Druk-Amitabha nuns arranged this whole party for myself, Venerable Gogwang, and the teaching team, with cakes and like confetti and gifts. And, they were sobbing. I was crying. It was just so momentous to have created a Varsa for all of these nuns coming together. I mean, if we look in the United States, they have Varsa at Gampo Abbey and they have Varsa at Tupten Children's Monastery. So for the Mahayana tradition, there are two places on this continent that hold this ceremony in the Mahayana, because you can't do it without 4 fully ordained people, and you can't do it for nuns without 4 fully ordained nuns. You can't have the biannual sojourn without 4 fully ordained nuns being in the same room. Living in America, I'm able to do sojourn maybe once a decade when I'm with other fully ordained nuns, to have that number. So to have had this time together as nuns together, and to see how at each juncture in history when the nuns' lineage became fragile, nuns in some country got it revived enough to continue, revived enough to have fully qualified people to teach and make that thread of continuity keep going. It really was a stunning realization of how significant it is and important it is, because what we know from Buddhism is it cannot flourish unless we have 4-fold Sangha, fully ordained monks, fully ordained nuns, lay men and lay women. So without the fully ordained nuns, which is the most fragile at this moment of all the groups, Buddhism can't really flourish. So we have a little bit of time left for some questions. I hope I've given you a sense of what we all accomplished together. So what questions do you have? Or thoughts or perspective?
It's difficult after seeing the machinery behind this to have any questions, really. I mean, what I find is how stunning it is to see all of those bright, smiling faces and all of the camaraderie. I mean, it's heartrending. And also Venerable Gogwang has such an incredible presence that I'm sure, I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it must have been phenomenal for that many levels of lives to come together in harmony and see how they can support each other just visually, just seeing that there can be someone like Gogwang or like you or the Shravasti nuns. I mean, it's just so beautiful. It's kind of hard to come with the question.
Well, and to really, to see the commitment of everybody to maintain a harmonious community, considering all of those differences, and to really see, wow, we were able to do that. Not that, there weren't difficulties in, the rooms. I had a VIP room. But the other, the dorm rooms could hold, 10 beds with like 2 feet in between the beds, so that we all lived together in the heat. There was only air conditioning from 8 at night to midnight. And be so committed to what we were doing that we didn't let any obstacle break down the commitment. Yeah, Sugil. You're mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Kendall, for doing this. The photos were just gorgeous, and your whole description of each part of this really moved me. And what I was feeling in my heart when I was listening to you and looking at the pictures was just the amount of devotion there, just pure devotion and pure joy, and everything that everyone went through to organize all of this. It kind of blew my mind a little bit. So
Well,
thank you.
yes, I don't think I emphasized enough what Venerable Chuni did. Venerable Chuni was in charge of the rituals. So how do you conduct rituals in 5 different languages at this, within the amount of time? How do you move? How do you incorporate people from the different languages into participating? And then how do you have people like the Sojong part of it is, the purpose of it is looking at your vows and being transparent about any imperfections. So it has to be in languages that you understand. So how do you have all these people coming in with different languages and confessing to people who can understand them simultaneously? So then there's a recitation of all the vows. So we were conducting Sojong in 5 different languages in different, part of it together and part of it in different spaces. So her mind working with Venerable Gogwang, what can we simplify? And then how do we accomplish it? Using music that was the Chinese melodies that are very complicated. It was really unbelievable work on everybody's part, particularly of the planning team. I take this on, and we're going to make it work in a way that holds people. Other observations or questions? Annie?
I'm just so impressed that they're able to pull all this together, so many dedicated people. And, I think we really got a sense of how complex it was and the level of communication that was needed. And it's really amazing. And I feel so much gratitude that we could be a witness in a small, tiny part of this, and to see what was done, and wow, just so wonderful.
And none of it could have taken place without years of work from, let's say, the Dharma drum community, Venerable Children's community. Venerable Damcho is a really experienced teacher, and she's a really terrific Vinaya teacher, but she has been studying under Venerable Children all these years. And they translated all of these monastic rituals into English and practiced them enough with the Chinese music that then they can confidently teach. I couldn't teach these rituals. I have not practiced them enough. I had 1 or 2 yarnes at Gampo Abbey. But because they have been working on building a fully functioning monastic community, they had the experience. Barbara.
Oops. I'm just so glad that the nuns progressed and they got what they needed. Thank you for doing that. And I'm really happy about that. Thanks.
I think it's so important that nuns get their full monastic education. We need to support and encourage the nuns in our country to have the expectation that they receive full monastic training. One of the nuns who came from Australia has been a nun a fairly long time, and she said, I've never received anything like this. And no one told me. You know, we need to help nuns understand what they're not being told. It's not intentional. It's just not acknowledging the spiritual agency and authority of nuns, which also means women. And that for full agency and authority, the full range of training is needed. And it is 11. So, Annie, if you'd like to do the dedication prayers, please.
By this virtue may I achieve omniscience, and may all who travel on the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death cross the ocean of samsara by defeating all enemies, confusion, the cause of suffering. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. I pray that the Lama may have good health. I pray that the Lama may have long life. I pray that your Dharma activities spread far and wide. I pray that I may not be separated from you. For this realm encircled by snow-covered mountains, you are the source of every benefit and bliss without exception. Tenzin Gyatso, you who are one with Avalokiteshvara, may you remain steadfast until samsara's end. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one. Seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Nobleman Jushri, the Lord of Speech, who manifests to hold the teachings of the Triple Gem, who raises the lamp of the sage's teachings, may you who are the light of the Dharma live long for hundreds of kalpas. The one known in the Holy Land as Aryadeva emanated into the Gar clan of eastern Tibet as Chidingpa, the heart son of Jigten Sumgon. May the life of glorious Garchen remain steadfast for 100 eons. We acknowledge that Vajradakini Nunnery is on the traditional unceded land of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the stewards of this land for many centuries before European settlement. We honor all Indigenous peoples' beliefs, cultural heritage, their relationship with the land, the knowledge of their elders, and the spirit of the ancient ones. This recognition of Indigenous territorial land and beliefs is a small step along the long road of recognizing the truth of our shared history and moving towards reconciliation. We will continue this journey with our Indigenous neighbors as we weave our paths together in right relation.
So again, thank you. You were all part of this extraordinary Varsa. And the way you supported me, particularly the last month before and on getting home, on arriving home, gave me the strength to do all of the work that I needed to do. So yay.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and filling us in on the really auspicious tasks that happened.
It was an incredible experience. So take care. We're still looking at, what the next steps are in terms of a text and Sunday Dharma, but we will be here next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Kimmo.